Smart here, back making another video. Got a lot of requests for more of the play and explains, and specifically a lot of guys were asking for me to play the 200s on GG Poker. And they're good games. I like playing those games, so that's what I ended up recording, and we will talk about it in a post-game analysis. Before we do that, though, during the session, I don't go into any of the sessions with looking for anything specific. I just let the spots kind of come up organically. But there was a common theme throughout this session, which was, in order for me to make the most EV in that session, I had to play dynamic exploitative ranges against recreationals. There were a lot of spots where basically, rather than it being kind of more GTO-based reg-on-reg action, it was me playing against recreational, and it was my job to construct my range to heavily exploit them and do the best I can at that. And it got me thinking that I think that a lot of you would benefit from this little high-level presentation I'm about to show you, which I clearly spent many hours on with and hired many developers. So here's a little presentation for you about where our EV actually comes from. And I first just want to add that EV comes 90+% from the recreationals. And so if you were to ask me what is the #1 thing that you can do to increase your win rate in terms of studying time, it's going to be learning and understanding how recreationals play, where their ranges are vulnerable and how you can manipulate their ranges, and being able to do that in-game. That is going to be by far the biggest determining factor for how successful you are in reality at poker. This is, as you can see, my beautifully constructed presentation. This is going to attempt to kind of demonstrate to you guys where the EV comes from in playing poker and recreationals, and how important it is for you to be going after the recreationals and to be making the most money against them possible, and to be playing your exploitative strategies and dynamic ranges against them specifically. So in this graphic, we have 3 players are playing a 3-handed game. We have the recreational in the top left, we have us, the dynamic range player, in the middle, and we have the GTO reg only on the top right. So for this example, we will assume that the GTO reg is an incredibly good player. We can give him Linus love, doesn't matter. And so we're going to say that we cannot find any holes in his game, and we just can't exploit him with our exploitative strategies. In reality, this is never going to happen, but we'll just say that for the argument's sake. Okay, so what's going to happen at the table here? So who should you be firstly, and who wins the most money? Let's talk about it. So the GTO reg only, he's going to beat you as we're going to just call the dynamic range player, I'll call him me. We'll call it GTO reg, and rec is the rec. So the GTO reg is going to beat me for 5 big blinds, as I can't find any holes in his game, all of his ranges are perfect, and he just slowly beats me with his theoretically perfect ranges. Fine. Then he beats the recreational for 10 big blinds, as same thing for the recreational, there's no holes in the GTO reg's game, but the recreational just makes more mistakes, so he also loses to the GTO only reg. So he gets 5 big blinds from me and 10 big blinds from the recreational. He's going to win 15 DBs per 100. We'll just say that there's no rake. Okay, now let's talk about us as a dynamic range player. So we're going to lose to the GTO reg at 5 big blinds, so we are now -5 in the game. But we can beat the recreational for 30 big blinds per 100 because we're using a maximum exploitative strategy, which drastically increases our win rate. Because the GTO only reg, he just knows how to play his perfect GTO ranges, and that will beat the recreational 100%. But it's not going to beat him at nearly the rate as we can, when we deviate our strategy to specifically target his ranges. So net, we are going to end up in the game winning at 25 BB per 100, as opposed to the GTO regs 15 BB per 100. And then the recreational is going to lose to both of us for a 40 BB loss. And I just wanted to make this clear that playing poker is not about beating a specific player at the table. Your goal should be to beat the game. So it's just, you want to obviously be able to beat every player at the table. It's not like you want to be losing to certain players at the table. All I'm trying to explain to you guys is that you're far better off working and learning how to improve on your actual win rate by learning how recreationals think, learning what they do, learning how to target them and attack their ranges. And then as you get very efficient at that, you can also start to do the same thing to more of the GTO guys. And in reality, nobody's going to have their ranges completely intact in every spot. You can be exploited everywhere, myself included. It's just about the better you play, kind of the more your ranges are going to be able to withstand heat on every street and every node, rather. And yeah, I just wanted to make that clear that I think that a lot of players are kind of going in the wrong direction in terms of they're trying to get better at poker, and they think to themselves, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to purely study a solver and learn the GTO solution so I can just play this strategy and I'm going to make the most money and be the best player. And that's just leaving so much money on the table with poker creativity and exploitation, specifically against the recreationals. And in this video, we are going to talk about a bunch of spots that ended up coming up organically. And that's just something that I feel extremely strongly about and I want to share with you guys. So enjoy the video. We're going to start the play and explain portion of the video. One of the benefits of doing a post-game analysis like this is I can kind of fast forward and highlight the interesting spots to talk about, as opposed to playing through all the hands and dead space of a live play. So I will go ahead and do that. So the first hand is on the bottom left, easy open on the cutoff with pocket nines. Big blind calls, and then he donks one big blind right away. So I think here's right away we should be thinking potential recreational. Our hand, I don't think, would make a nice raise, as he could have a Jack X, and if he's bluffing, we're happy to kind of let him bluff. And our hand cannot handle a 3-bet. If we let him bluff us, if let's say he has a hand like ace-4 of clubs, or 5-6 of clubs, or 4-5 of clubs, and we raise and he 3-bets, we are going to have to fold a significant amount of equity. So our hand is just happy to call here. Make the call. Turn. He bets pot, and this is an important concept where when you're bluff catching, at this point we're bluff catching clearly, you choose, it's not so much about your absolute hand strength, it's more about your blockers and unblockers. So for example, I would much rather call here with a hand like ace deuce of diamonds on this turn than a hand like pocket nines with the 9 of clubs. And the reason is that the big blind's bluffing range in this situation is going to have a lot of hands like 8-9 with 1 club, queen 9 with 1 club, the 9 of clubs in general for a flush draw. And we only have 2 outs to improve against a jack when we have pocket nines. But when we have a hand like ace deuce, we have 5 outs, as we have 2 outs to a deuce and then 3 outs to an ace. So this is an easy fold. Next up, we get our first hand of the day, which is a highly exploitative hand against a recreational. As you can see, then the player in the top right is playing a 32 VPIP, and we have king 3 suited in the big blind. And here I go for a squeeze. Basically, the idea is that calling is not going to have a ton of EV. It's going to be profitable, but I think that against certain recreationals, 3-betting a very wide range is going to be more profitable, as I can manipulate the range post-flop, along with they might just be folding almost their entire range once they've called the open, folding to the back 3-bet. And then also, again, having dynamic ranges, I know that the opener is a regular and he's opening a reasonably wide range, so he'll have hands like king, 6 suited, etc. It's not like against like a super tight guy. So basically, just certainly not 3-betting this hand every time or anything like that, but decided to go for it this time as I wanted to isolate the recreational heads up. So I go for the squeeze. My hand's decent. The king's a good blocker to remove the 4-betting range, and it's suited. It can play reasonably well, enough that I think it's more EV against these players in this line rather than calling. But again, not a situation where I'm saying you should be squeezing these hands often at all, just very situational. We get called by the recreational. We flop extremely strong, and right away it's important to think about dynamic ranges. We understand that his range is very wide, and here you don't want to make the mistake of thinking to yourself that you want to bet very large because he's never going to fold a pair type thing. Like if he's got pocket 5s and you start betting like half pot or large, they will fold. And I think a lot of players are under the assumption that's like they have these rules in their head for recreational, where it's like recreationals never bluff, recreationals always this, recreationals like, and it needs to be way more nuanced than that. Way more nuanced. You're going to have different types of recreationals, and they're all going to have their own characteristics. So in this specific spot, I think that because he has a very wide range, and also it's just going to be a decent play in general, I think betting very small to get him to continue with a wide portion of his range and force him to kind of navigate that range post-flop afterwards is going to be the best play. On the turn, I think that it's very important to, again, have your ranges dynamic and think about your opponent's range. I think a lot of you, if you got to this spot, you'd find the flop bet. Obviously, you wouldn't have king 3, but let's say you had king queen. The mistake I think that you guys would make on the turn would be you guys would look at the board and see that it's getting kind of drawy and you want to protect your hand and you want to get the money in. But because recreationals ranges are a lot wider, we can kind of force them to make mistakes with we can force them to make mistakes because they have such a wider range. So for example, if I were to just jam or bet 3/4 pot, I make his life extremely easy with a lot of his range, as he's going to be folding basically every pair that's not a king. I would say is a pretty reasonable idea. So what I end up doing is I end up betting very small, and what this can do is against certain recreational player types, they view this bet as very weak because they're not really thinking as much about ranges. They're kind of more looking at their hand and looking at bet sizing and going more instinctively and off of feel. So this is a nice spot where I can get him to continue with a much wider range by betting smaller than I would on this type of board if I bet bigger. Specifically when I have this hand, specifically against this player. So I end up going for quarter pot, which is, and he instantly jams. Well, I guess I'll show you guys the hands first. So he's got the Jack-7 of diamonds. So clearly he thought that in this sizing sequence by me, I never have a strong hand. I have either like a draw or pocket 9s to pocket queens region, but the fact that he jammed, if you saw instantly, didn't even think about it. This was like, oh, this sizing's weak, I'm all in. And the big crux of this hand for me is, obviously, ignore the fact that we have king 3. Like, let's say that you're in this spot and you have ace, king, or king, queen. There are definitely times when betting large against recreational is the way to go, 100%. But there's also a lot of times where, and kind of inducing them and letting them kind of hang themselves with these wide ranges is the play. So for example, on the turn, if I bet a large 3/4 pot, a lot of recreationals in his shoes are just going to either fold the turn outright. So that's going to be a huge portion of them with the Jack 7 here. They're just going to fold if I bet like 3/4. And then the other part is that the rest of them are just going to call that 3/4 bet, which would leave me another like 50 blinds or so on the river that I would not have got had I had not bet this size. And I'm not saying that, betting this size is always going to induce this play. All I'm trying to show you guys is that your sizings need to depend on the type of situation and who you're playing against, because oftentimes they have more EV in different lines than just bet large, bet large, bet large. Because by doing that, you kind of eliminate the options for not just recreational, but for other players to kind of make mistakes against what your actual range is. So, good hand from us where we got the nice induce, where we got him to commit way too light, and he has 19% equity, which is great. So we hold, and this is kind of winning 100 EVs and just finding a stack in a spot where, most players are just going to always call this hand pre-flop and then not choose the sizings to maximally exploit our opponent post-flop. Next hand, we have ace-queen in the small blind against a suspected regular. We're not sure, but we just go off the information we have, which is Russian player, sitting deeper, 27 VPIP, never played against the guys. It's like, okay, we go for the 3-bet. Always be willing to adjust our reads as hand goes on and as we gain more information, but we have to work with what we have. He calls. Flop is 5-5-6. I think in this spot, a lot of the guys in these games play quite tight, so I don't expect the in-position player to have as many hands like 5-4 suited or 5-6 suited or ace-5 suited as he might in theory. So I think in reality, I'm doing very well on this board, just given my overpair advantage. But I think that he would be very used to seeing a bet from me on this board and kind of understanding how his range should play on various turns and rivers facing a bet line from me. So instead, we decide to give him a line that maybe he's less used to seeing that is still a good line, which is we go for the check, realizing that A, we're deeper, so in general you want to do more checking when you're deeper, as most of your hands don't want to play as big of a pot here. So for example, if we were 100 big blinds deep here, pocket queens can easily just go for stacks if the board breaks out. But as you kind of get deeper, it becomes less and less good. Like let's say that the turn is like a 4. We can still go for stacks at 100 VBs with pocket queens, whereas even though he's going to turn 8-7 suited and pocket 4s at some frequency, but the deeper we get, this becomes a bigger and bigger concern. So a lot of our value has to slow down. So to balance that out, a lot of our bluffs have to slow down as well. So we go for the check, and he goes for the quick 40% or so bet. And right away, we can kind of make some assumptions, I think, based off his range. I think that this is a very deliberate sizing that is likely to kind of fit what his hand wants to do, which is to protect and value bet against our perceived ace highs. And so we're likely running into a range that's betting too many of the pocket 7s through pocket jacks region. Having a queen here is really nice, as I block pocket queens, which is going to be one of his stronger overpairs. And then having the ace just makes it so that if I do turn a river and ace, I have a very strong pair to show down. I go for a large check raise on the flop. I think that this basically, like I said, is going to punish the players who are betting these pocket pair region too often and are not used to seeing aggression on this board in this way. They're more used to the out of position player showing aggression in the bet line. So he thinks about it for a while, and also kind of being deep, players are less comfortable, and you kind of get into the idea that like he doesn't want to make a mistake deeper, so he ends up folding, which is great. Top left we will discuss as well. I have king 3 of diamonds in the big blind, and the early position player opens, don't know anything about the guy, I call, check flop, turn, my hand is a clear 2 street value bet. Sizing, I just go for a normal size here. Could probably overbet, but I like this normal size for this hand. But the interesting part of this hand is kind of seeing, well, I'll let the hand play out. He's going to end up raising, and I kind of think to myself, should my hand 3-bet or should I call? Basically, he's kind of repping pocket 3s with this line, and I have a 3. And I guess he could also be repping like pocket kings as well, but it's a very odd line to see a check back and then raise specifically on this turn. I guess also double specifically when I have the 3 myself blocking like the nutted combinations he's representing. I guess he could also have a hand like for bluffs, like a 4-5 or ace-4 or ace-5 type hand. In game, I figured that just based off my hand, it was way too likely that he was just bluffing, and I didn't want to shut his bluffs out. So I kind of like toy with the idea of should I 3-bet or should I call, and I end up deciding that calling is the best option, just to kind of let him bluff and do his thing. But I think the interesting part is just kind of showing his hand selection and kind of like some exploits gone wrong for this player. So I go for check. He has the polarized range. He checks back and he just shows down Jack 10 of hearts. And so there needs to be a method to your madness. Like when you're playing exploitative poker, I don't know what compelled this player to make this play with his hand, but whatever it was not correct. And I think it's just important that if you're going to be I do advocate making exploitative deviations and plays, but I think that you need to be honest with yourself about what your confidence level is in that play or in that spot before making these plays. Otherwise, you could wind up doing things like this, which are just kind of pure punts, because his hand has no business raising, and I feel like this is kind of a very feel-based play, as opposed like just an emotional decision of at the time, like I'm going to bluff this guy or whatever it might be, rather than kind of looking at his hand, maybe like using some range analysis to kind of realize that this hand doesn't really make any sense as a bluff raise in this situation. I'm completely uncapped, and there's just no reason to play his hand like this. So yeah, we end up showing down. Cool. Okay, next hand. Again, if you want to hammer home the idea of dynamic ranges, we're going to have Queen 10 suited in the top right and in the small blind. And if you notice, we have our friend with the King 3 suited versus Jack 7 suited hand in the big blind, so we want to play pots with him. So I go for the call in this situation, and I'm going to widen my calling range substantially in this spot because, like I said, I want to get involved with this player. I want him to make mistakes, and rather than me 3-betting some of these hands and shutting him out, you gain more EV by letting him in. And then, as played, very good board for me. I'm going to have a lot of these small pocket pairs, 9-10 suited, 8-9 suited type hands, 6-5 suited. So I go for a small donk bet with my hand just because the board is so advantageous for me. I think that this is going to put a lot of pressure on a lot of the under the guns range. So for example, if he has a hand like King Jack of diamonds, or he has a hand like Ace 9 of clubs on the flop, a lot of these hands I can get them to fold that I have that better than me. And then I can also pick up some straight draws like this on the turn, and I can continue to fire. I choose a small sizing representing a depolarized range. Goes through, which is great. Here at the top left, we have pocket aces, my favorite hand in poker. Go for the 3-bet. Flop is very good for me. A lot of these players are not going to even open pocket 2s or 5s under the gun ever. Slash, they'll fold. Some guys, they're even folding like pocket 7s almost always, and pocket 5s when they do open versus the 3-bet. So I'm going to have a lot of equity on this board with my overpairs. So I go for the C-bet, looking to basically get my stack in against his weaker overpairs. Turn is a 7. It's important to really be range aware. It might look like it's a scare card, but in reality, he has almost no 7s. He might, like, if he's a looser player, he might have 2 combos of 7-6 suited, but that's basically it. Then he could have pocket 7s. So our hand is still extremely strong. We're looking to play for stacks, so it's important for our sizing to enable us to do so. So we go for a pot. Bluffs here, basically, you can pick your poison here. You can have all kinds of double high card hands, king queen, clubs, ace 4 of diamonds. Basically, you want hands that, when you river a top pair, are worth value betting and worth money. You go for the double barrel on the turn, and he just folds, unfortunately. So next up, we have an example of a very poor exploit by my opponent, and kind of one of the ideas in exploitation is when you go for an exploitive strategy, basically it's going to be a highly profitable spot for one player versus the other. You're either going to win and your exploit's strong, or you're going to exploit yourself. And this is an example of this player going for a very poor exploit that he ends up completely exploiting himself. So I just wanted to highlight this. So I open ace king offsuit on the button, or on the under the gun. This player, I get 3-bet by a player I know nothing about. Call ace king. He goes for a 3rd pot bet. I believe I need to call here with ace-king, even with no heart. It's going to be close either way. I think in reality I can get away with it very confidently, because players don't do a good job of barreling like non-heart hands, and they don't do a good job of defending their ranges when flushes come in. So I end up making the call. It's not thrilling for sure. The interesting part is on the turn. So we call, and then this player goes for a very exploitative play, and he immediately bets 1 big blind. And so right away, we should kind of, to take it at face value, we can look at it as a hand that doesn't want to face a large bet, so, but a hand that wants to continue. So an example in range construction might be, he might have a hand like pocket 8s or pocket 6s or 7s with a heart, where, or even without a heart, where he's almost essentially checked, where he's trying to get me to not play a large bet. Or you could have a 1 heart high card hand, like king queen or ace queen, something like that. We have a very easy call with a gut shot and our overcards. But the interesting part is just on the river with what he shows down with. So we have a clear check, we beat all of his high cards, and he ends up showing down ace jack with the ace of hearts. So he basically exploited himself here with this turn sizing, as he had a hand that is a very clear barrel, blocking the nuts, having outs to the nuts, and can put pressure on me having a bunch of hands. Like, I'm still going to have a bunch of pocket pairs without a heart on the turn that I'm going to be in big trouble with and folding a lot of them. And then this hand as well is a disaster for him. So he has a hand where if he had bet any normal sizing, my hand is pure folding. But he tried to make an exploit that one ended up just completely exploiting himself by he allowed me to show down a hand that my hand should never be able to show down against on the turn, like past the turn, as he should just bet his hand. And so just wanted to put this hand in here because even even though I do advocate playing exploitative poker, there needs to be proper frameworks and understanding about what you're doing. It's not just about on the fly kind of feeling out, oh, this makes sense or whatever. It's very important when you play an exploitative framework that you have a very comprehensive, well thought out thought process and framework to execute your strategies. Not just you're in the heat of the moment, you don't know what to do, so you decide, oh, I don't, I'll do whatever. Like, that's never going to be a good way to become a strong exploitative player. You need to know in advance what you're looking for, what to do when you find it, what your strategy looks like, what their strategy looks like, who you're playing against, and all these other factors. So this was just a very poor exploit by this player. So picking up with the theme of this video of getting involved with recreationals and kind of making sure that we tailor our strategy specifically against them. We have pocket jacks on the button against a recreational, obviously a pure 3-bet against anybody. So we 3-bet him. This is where a lot of your EV is going to come from, having premiums against recreationals for sure. Okay, flop is queen, queen, 9, two-tone. I like to go for a small bet with high frequency here against almost anybody. It's just a very good strategy. He's going to have a lot of hands that are going to be complete misses. So he's going to have like ace 10 of spades, which he's going to put a lot of pressure on. And then he's going to have small pocket pairs, which he can call. Like my range either wants him to call flops and fold turns, or I can kind of manipulate the pot size by playing turns and rivers by taking free cards when I want to check, because players are going to kind of under check raise these types of spots. So I go for a small bet, totally fine. At this point, it's just a pure value bet against his range. Here he goes for a min raise. So right away, we've got a very interesting spot where we need to dissect his range. So the first thing we look at is we can see that he's playing a 32 VPIP, so there's some information. So not like a super nitty recreational. When recreationals make this kind of raise when they make raises in general, small raises, they often do a play that the regulars don't, and that is not a good play, which is the idea of you've heard this before, I'm sure, they kind of raise to see where they're at. So basically they have hands that they don't feel comfortable calling down with, but they put you on ace king a lot because they understand that that's in a 3-betting range a lot, and that's what's in their 3-betting range, like almost always, because people tend to just project their own ranges onto other players. And so this can be, you're going to find some recreationals here who this is a hand like pocket 2s through pocket 10s like every time, and never queen X and never pocket 9s. But then you're also going to run into some players who this is like a milking check raise where they do have the pocket 9s and pocket queens. It's also going to be draws like king 10, king jack, jack 10, and diamonds. I end up going for the call as I want to see more information. Like, you could just jam here, but if you assume that you're the better player, then you want more, you want there to be more complicated decisions. So if I just jam here, he's just going to call with whatever his calling range, fine. But if I call and we play different turns, he's going to then be forced to balance his flop check raising range with turn checks and bets, and for different sizings. And so I get more information so I can make more exploitative adjustments. So I go for the call. Turn offsuit 6, good card. No, he's going to have pocket 6s sometimes, but pocket stack ratio of 1 if he does, GG. So here, now we get a lot of information. He quickly goes for the 3rd pot bet on this board. So now what he's done is, it's very unlikely that my opponent has a naked queen at this point, because recreationalists do a very poor job of balancing their sizings. And on this board, a lot of them are going to perceive it to be a very wet board, and so they're going to want to protect their hand. They're very adamant about protecting their hands, so they're going to bet large. I do think that he could still have the absolute nuts where he could have a queen 9 suited or pocket 9s, and if he does, it's GG. But I think the important part of this hand is that of this sizing on the turn is that we heavily discount the single queen X, as they will be betting larger. And then now with the pot already being 40 blinds and he only having 20 behind, I think that most of his range is going to be weaker at this point. He's going to have hands like, even though I block it with the 2 jacks, he's still going to have hands like Jack 10, 10 8 is now a double gutter, King 10, King Jack, and diamonds. So my hand's not strong enough to trap against that, especially with so little behind. So I decide that on the turn, we've got more information to make a more profitable jam than on the flop. So I go for that. He ends up having the Jack 10, which is completely congruent with his sizings. And we get him to call off, which is great. Win the hand, always nice. Okay, bottom left, we have pocket 9s against our friend. The Jack 7 suited aggressive guy, aggressive recreational. So right away, we always think in dynamic ranges. The first thing we think about is we should be widening our 3-betting range for value against this player. If he's calling with Jack 7 suited against a squeeze, then a lot of our Broadway hands are going to dominate his calling range. So for example, if we have a hand like King Jack offsuit in this situation, and he's calling with all of his like Jack 7, Jack 6, King 5 suited, it makes our top pairs a lot stronger than a theoretical range. Pocket 9s is an easy 3-bet for value against anybody, so we go for that. Calls. Flop the nuts, which is always good. So here it's very important for us to, again, have dynamic ranges and think about who we're playing against, what we've seen from this player, and how we want to size our hand and exploit him. So if you bet, you should have 2 sizings here for sure. I think if you have a hand like pocket 10s to queens, you should, or ace 9, I think putting them into a large sizing to jam a bunch of turns is going to be a very good play. But I also think that you want to have some bluffs and some nutted hands into a smaller bet sizing. And on this hand specifically, I put it into a super small bet sizing again, as we've already seen from this player that he interprets the very small bets as weaker, probably like the ace highs. And so I know this kind of in game, and this is why taking notes is important. So I go for the very small bet. What this is going to do is it's going to get him to float with a lot of hands that are basically drawing dead. It's also going to induce a lot of raises with hands that he should not raise with, such as like total air or the protection play. So he goes for a very large raise. We're obviously elated. Very important here to just call and let him do his thing. He's gonna, some guys, recreationals, are definitely gonna have hands like 10-7, Queen Jack, Jack 10, 6-7, and they're gonna have all those like 8-out or like draws. And if it hits on the turn from you just slow playing the flop, GG. It is what it is. That's totally fine. It's much better to let that happen than for you to jam here and to deny him the opportunity to bluff when he has. Some recreationals here are going to have a hand like 4 or 5 parts, and if you jam here, he just gets to save his money. We're still looking at his additional 56 big blinds that we want, and this is where a huge part of your win rate comes into poker, is how we can extract that. So I go for the call. Very obvious. I think that a lot of you guys would find this call. Here's where I get spicy on the turn. I think that very natural for everyone to play check on this turn. You have the absolute nuts. Your opponent's drawing dead with his entire range, essentially. Why bet? And so the reason is because a lot of recreationals, like I said before, they do this play where they raise in position with hands that they don't want to face aggression with in the future. So In this specific situation, I put him on a lot of small pocket pairs, like 3s to 7s region. And then they're also going to have a bunch of those total airball hands. So if he has a hand like Queen 7 of clubs, which they totally could have, it would be a disaster for me to bet here and get him to fold that. He's still going to have all those straight draws, but that's going to put the money in himself. Whether I check, he's going to jam those like straight draws, or if I bet, he'll end up calling them. So I kind of do a very exploitative play, and I end up betting extremely small. I end up betting, what do I bet here? Like 5%, less than that. What this does is it allows me to just extract more value from his entire range while not changing his range composition, which was poorly constructed on the flop. So what that means in more detail is all the hands that I mentioned, so when he still has all those straight draws, he's still going to rip it in, and he's still going to, I'm still going to get all the money out of that region of the range. This really targets hands when he has pocket 3s through pocket 7s region, where I'm not letting him do his play of raising the flop and checking back the turn. I'm forcing him to pay an extra few big blinds, which it does add up if you can identify these types of scenarios. And then the most important thing is I also don't bet a size that I don't allow him to not hang himself with a complete airball. So when he has 4 or 5 of spades here, if I were to lead for half pot or a third pot or something big, he can just fold no problem, or if he has a hand like king queen offsuit. But when I choose this sizing, since we know from before that this player is very likely to perceive these small bets as weak and probably a lot of like ace highs in this scenario, putting me on like ace king, ace queen, I think it's just a very nice situation to make a very exploitative, specifically tailored bet to this player. And we'll play the hand. So again, we kind of keep his entire range there. He goes for the instant jam, which we're excited to see, and he has the pocket 7s. And so this is a very clear example of how making these deviations can win a lot of money, because this is an extra 55 big blinds that, let's play the hand as you guys would play it, or most of you would play it. If you check the turn, a lot of these recreationals have raised the flop to get that free start on, so then they check back the turn, okay? And then what? On the river, ace or king, if you jam, you're never going to get the money. On a river, 10 or jack, you might not get the money. And if the river breaks out, like let's say the river is a 3, you don't know whether you should jam yourself, or if because he checked back the turn, he has a complete airball, so you need to check. So this, I think, was just the best way to exploit my opponent in this specific hand, and it's going to depend on the recreational and the spot, but it's just important to have a very wide array of tools to extracting max value from them. Okay, so in sticking with today's theme, top left we have the beautiful ace-king offsuit in the small blind. We are 130 deep, and we see an open from a 43 VPIP player. The HUDs on GG are certainly not, don't take them as science, like they're not particularly accurate, but you got to work with the information you have. So let's play the hand. Very obvious 3-bet for value if it's folded to me. So we go for the 3-bet. He calls. Now, this flop. This is the most important street for this hand's EV in this specific situation against this player. We know that this player likely has way too wide of a range, and I think that a lot of you would make the mistake of betting your hand here. And the reason why that's a huge mistake is because your hand is not going to be a value bet on 3 streets across many runouts. Given the ranges at play here, your opponent is going to have a lot of hands that already beat you, so he's going to have ace 10, he might even have the offsuit combo, so let's say he has ace 10 suited, ace 10 offsuit, queen jack suited, queen jack offsuit, king jack with both, king queen, 10-9, pocket jacks, some guys have pocket queens here, or he could have ace king himself. So certainly not a board that you're just going to go bet, 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 and he's going to call down 3 streets. Like, he might have a hand like king 10 or king 9, but there's just not enough combos to outweigh all the other value bets that or all the other hands that he has that beats you. So there's one data point that we take into consideration. But the more important data point we take into consideration is the common theme of we force guys to play and balance their ranges correctly. So if he has a 43% VPIP and he's got too many hands pre-flop, so he has 10-7 of clubs, he's got all the ace deuces, he's got, you know, all the small pocket pairs, he's got 8-5 suited, all of these types of hands. If we bet this flop, we do him a huge favor by enabling him to fold a lot of these no equity hands that if we check, we force him to have to navigate which ones of these hands is he going to bluff and which ones is he going to check. This isn't just for recreationals. This concept applies to all types of players where players are not very accurate when constructing their bluffing ranges across multiple streets. They tend to be in balance one way or the other. And so for this specific situation, if we assume that this player has all pocket pairs, deuces through 10 still, all these suited connectors, 4-5 suited, ace-5 suited, ace-8 suited, 7-6 suited, 8-9 suited, 10-4 suited, right? All these types of hands, he's got the jack-10 offsuit, queen-10. I think it's so important to make sure that we give him the opportunity to take way too many of those hands and bluff them. And that's going to massively outweigh the very few times he has the king 10 or king 9 and we can just go bet, bet, bet and play for stacks. So very important to find this flop check. We take a look at the stats. We see he's got the 43 VPIP, 500 hands. We think about dynamic ranges. How do we play our range with this hand, specifically against this player? So we decide checks the play for the reasons I mentioned. He goes for a large bet. Right away, we need to be thinking about ranges. When he makes this sizing of a bet, we're basically bluff catching almost immediately. Like, he's going to have all those value combinations that I mentioned, all the 2 pairs, so queen jack, king queen, all the ace 10s, all the 10-9s, and then maybe occasionally he'll be betting this big with a hand like king 10 or ace king. So we're already bluff catching basically. But we know he has a very wide range, and we've purposely put in a very strong hand in this range to be able to handle the aggression. We don't only just have here jack 10 suited or queen 10 suited that is going to go call, fold often at times. So again, easy turn check. He's got the polarized range. We are trying to let him blast off. He bets large again. We stick to the same story. We know that he has too wide of a range pre-flop. We know he's going to have way too many hands like 8-9 of clubs, pocket deuces, all these types of weak hands that we mentioned. No need to protect our hand. We need to keep in the weakest parts of his range as often as possible. Call. If he has a hand like pocket 7s or pocket 4s or jack 7 suited, it is what it is. GG. No reason to jam the turn. You just got to let these guys take their wide range, and you need to punish them for it when they are too aggressive with it because they don't understand how wide their range is. We make the call, of course. He's got the 6 deuce of diamonds. And so that's 130 big blinds that you guys would have missed out if you had c-bet the flop. And for not understanding how the ranges at play here are working and how it's much better to let the widest and weakest parts of your opponent's range put in the most money rather than looking to make your hand quote unquote easier to play or to extract a little bit of value on the flop. And then I'll also add alternatively that had the flop gone check, check, there's nothing stopping me from putting in 2 very large bets on the turn and river. So I can kind of extract value still from when he has those showdown bound type hands. So bottom left, we have aces. This player in the big blind said that he enjoyed my videos, and so I decided to put this hand in that I played against him to a little bit of poker training and education in this hand that I think that everyone can learn from. So with specifically his play, we open up the gun, he calls, turn, or we check back the flop. Aces is a nice check here without the club, as it's pretty unlikely I'm going to be able to get 3 streets from him on a ton of runouts, but it can pick off a bunch of bluffs and a bunch of runouts. Turn, he goes for the small sizing. It's totally fine. He's basically saying that he has a lot of protection bets. We have a clear call. River, he goes for a check, so he's basically saying that he's had a bunch of protection bets on the turn, and now on the river they are not strong enough to value bet, and he's trying to show down against my high cards. I could have a hand like Queen Jack, King Queen, King Jack. I end up going for the value bet. Choose pot, basically representing a 10 or better. He ends up calling, and he ends up showing 9-8, and his call's fine with his hand selection, unblocking all the queen jacks and the straight draws, but the advice or the concept that I want to explain here is I don't think his hand was a mistake betting the turn. He can definitely put hands like that into a small betting range. I think that can be a good strategy against a lot of guys. The idea, though, is that he needs to be cognizant of not putting too many of these hands, or specifically all the hands as well, into this range on the turn, because then that's going to leave his river range basically extremely vulnerable, because he's going to have a lot of these hands that want protection on the turn for the small sizing are also hands that want to go to showdown and being able to call bets and only beat bluffs. And so if he takes all those hands that only beat bluffs and he always puts them into the small betting range for protection, then his river range is just going to be pure folding, essentially. But like I said, with 9-8 specifically, I think it's a fine bet, and it's a good river call on blocking all of the straight draws, the queen jacks, king jack, king queens. Okay, bottom left, we are against another recreational, and I'm going to kind of show you, this is like a adjustment made in real time, how to exploit the recreationals using our dynamic ranges, using our frameworks, and understanding sizings and where we can attack their ranges. So he goes for a 4x on the button. Ace Jack still going to be well ahead of this range. Don't want to 3-bet. Easy call. He's rocking the 40 VPIP. Good check. He goes for pot. So right away, it's important to look at the stack to pot ratio. He did not start the hand 100 big blinds, so Ace Jack is extremely strong for me in this situation. It's one of my strongest hands. I'm very happily stacking off here. Also, when a recreational chooses pot as opposed to a smaller sizing, in general, it's going to be significantly stronger. So all these data points make it so that I want to raise for value and get it in. He's still going to have a bunch of weaker jacks, a bunch of 5x, 7x, 8, 9, 6-4 suited, 6-8 suited, 9-10 offsuit, pocket 8s through 10s. So, and he's still going to have some hands like king-queen offsuit, so double overcard hands, which I don't mind protecting against, specifically if they're not going to bluff me on brick turns. So we go for the small raise, looking to get it in happily. And he goes for the instant fold. So for him to instant fold there after choosing the pot sizing on that board texture, it means that he had a total air hand. So he had a hand like, what was the board? He had a hand like ace deuce or king 6 or queen 8 suited. And so because recreational players have very clear sizing tells in a lot of situations, I mean, even a bunch of regulars do as well, I immediately take that note. So can pot c-bet fold. I write down the board. Jack 5-7 rainbow on the button. That's what I'm writing. So within 30 seconds later, we get another spot against the exact same player, where we have the king 9 of diamonds in the top right, and he makes a 3.5x open from under the gun. Normally I'd fold this against a lot of guys, but he's playing, like I said, 40 VPIP, and I want to be playing pots against him because he's certainly a recreational, and I think I can make up for maybe some of the theoretical EV lost pre-flop with my call by EV and by equity realization post-flop in reality. We get a very similar board, the Jack 7 deuce. We go for the check. He goes for the instant pot. And we've literally just seen this situation from this player, and recreationals are not going to be as perspicacious as you should be. And so there's no way that he's not writing down, hey, I just made this pot c-bet on this board texture, and I folded instantly so my opponent knows that I have bluffs in this line and in this sizing. He's not thinking about that. But you, as a player who's trying to win, or if you're professional, you should be. You need to be. So here's a situation where I understand that basically this scenario has just presented itself a second ago, and we got some information, and we're going to have dynamic ranges here where against a lot of recreationals, when they open under the gun 3.5x and then they pot Jack deuce 7 rainbow, and you have king 9 of diamonds, you should be turbo folding because they're going to have way too many top pairs or better. But against this guy, we know that he likes to put bluffs in this line. So we go for the min raise, risking 15 to win 15, so it doesn't have to work often. And then also we have good hand selection, as we can turn a backdoor flush draw, we can turn a king for top pair, we can turn an 8 or a 10 for a straight draw. So it's not like we're just picking pocket threes here and have hands at random as well. Like, we still have to be cognizant of what types of hands we want to be bluffing with. So we go for the raise, and you get a turbo fold again. And so there's 15 big blinds right there just kind of handed to us. And if we can, it's not about the situation, it's the concept of we are more aware of what our opponent's ranges are in reality, and we're tailoring our strategy to counter his. And that's kind of what I want to teach and preach and kind of get you guys better understanding. Sticking with the theme of the video, last up we're going to have this ace-jack suited hand on the top left. Our recreational player opens. We have a clear 3-bet for value. The hand gets interesting when we have another type of recreational, a very nitty recreational, snap calling the 3-bet cold. So when a very tight recreational calls a 3-bet out of position like this, there's a lot of information already gained about his range. He's going to have hands like pocket 9s through pocket jacks a lot. Then he's going to have hands like ace-king offsuit a lot, king-queen suited, ace-queen suited, and that's basically the entire range. There's a very small subsection of hands that this type of player will have in this situation. So on this board, first we go for a small c-bet, as we have an extremely strong hand that can get the money in no problem, and we can get him to fold some of his pocket 9s through pocket jacks, which is a huge win for this hand. We can also potentially multi-barrel depending on the run out to try to put pressure on his queen x. So we go for the flop bet. Opponent snap calls. Okay, so now we need to be cognizant of his range, and we remove the pocket 9s through jacks region of his range, as he's never going to just snap call those hands. Those are going to be likely folded. If he was going to snap call a jacks, maybe in theory, which they usually won't, it would be jacks with the jack of clubs, but he can't have that because we have the jack of clubs. So the interesting part in this turn is that because we are going to play our hand solely based off of our perception of our opponent's range, I think that in this situation our opponent is massively overweighted towards having ace-king, because his king-queen and pocket queens are going to check raise the flop basically always on this flush draw board. And we've eliminated his other pairs, so On this turn, my opponent is going to have ace-king, I'd say over like 80% of the time, this specific opponent of very tight, nitty recreational player. And so on this double flush draw dynamic turn, it would be an absolute disaster if we go for a large bet and we get jammed on by ace-king, because we have to fold so much equity. We have 9 outs to the nuts and then 3 outs to the gut shot to the nuts, because one of the 10 of clubs we don't count twice. So knowing this in game, I make myself a large amount of EV by recognizing that this player's range is way too strong for this situation, and he's going to have ace-king here, like I said, almost always. And so rather than me betting and risking him jamming on me on such a wet board, I get to check back and realize my equity. So I think about it and I'm like, okay, I understand everything I just said, so I end up going for the check. River is an excellent card. He ends up going for the half pot bet. And again, this is where we need to break down the ranges correctly. And we know he never has a full house here because his king, queen, pocket kings, and pocket queens combos always raise at other parts in the hand. And it's also important to having dynamic ranges means that our sizing, like in other spots with the pocket nines and some of the two-pair spots, I would bet very small when I had an extremely strong hand, where in this situation, I'm going to go very greedy and I'm going to go for all of it. And the reason is recreationals have a much more emotional attachment to their hands. This is likely because they play a lot fewer hands than a professional. So if you can imagine that someone who plays poker professionally or often is playing, let's say 50 to 75,000 hands a month, it makes every individual hand, they're kind of less attached to it. Whereas if you're a recreational player who plays poker once a week for an hour and a half, so, right, all of those hands, you're going to be way more attached to the result. And so what you'll find is, like, let's say that this player just had a hand happen to him 5 minutes ago where he had pocket queens, he 3-bet, and the board was ace high, and he ended up, like, they ended up showing down against like ace 10 for like a small pot or whatever. In his, that wouldn't matter to anyone who's playing very seriously, but to somebody, a recreational, he's going to be emotionally upset about that because from his perspective, he's like, oh man, I got sucked out on, I deserve to win that pot. So now in a situation where he has another premium hand, specifically in this case, if he has a hand like ace king, I think that because he's already a little frustrated, like he could be already frustrated from a very small amount of things happening in poker, which happen all the time, it can make things so that he's not going to understand all the data points of why I'm never bluffing here in this situation against this player, and how his hands are all of his ace king hands need to be folded because he's running into a 100% value range, but he's not going to understand any of this. And so I make sure that this is a spot where I go greedy and I go for all of it. I think that a lot of you guys in this situation would make the mistake of going like 45 or something like that, trying to get in with the logic of like, oh, I'm trying to get called, I don't want to make it too big. But that's leaving another 40 big blinds, which is a huge part of a win rate, on the table in a spot where this guy is going to have a reasonably inelastic range in this situation, meaning depending on how he's feeling or how he thinks about the spot in that time, he's either going to call ace king or he's going to fold ace king. And that difference, the differential factor is not going to be whether I put in an additional 40 blinds or whatever. So we go for the jam. It's also, he might, I'm not sure exactly, you can never know exactly how players view poker. A data point that could work in our favor as well is he might think that we never have a flush draw because everyone barrels flush draws all the time in position. So he might think that in this spot, like he would personally never have a flush draw because he would always bet his like ace jack and ace 10 and jack 10 of clubs. So he's like, oh, this guy can't have a flush. He must be bluffing. So there's a lot of good things that could work for us in this spot. So he's going to end up calling me in a spot where I have 0 bluffs because I know exactly what his range is and I don't expect him to fold it. So just another spot where we can really maximally exploit the recreational. And, you know, I already won a bunch of buy-ins just this session where these kind of spots kept coming up where we were able to manipulate our opponent's range into kind of doing what we want and putting money in when we want to. And that is going to be the most important thing when you're trying to build a win rate. All right, guys. This type of video takes a bit longer for sure, doing the post-game analysis as a live play, but I think it has a lot of value, and I know you guys enjoy them, so I'm happy about that. So yeah, guys, I hope that this video can kind of show you the power of exploitation. I made whatever it was, 300 something big blinds solely off of recreationals this session, specifically exploiting them with sizings and putting hands into ranges that might not work as well in theory, but in reality against real humans with the ranges at play work out extremely well. And I hope that you guys, next time you're looking to improve your poker game and study poker, you guys think to yourself the reality, which is that you guys should spend some of your time working on your exploitation, working on your dynamic range frameworks, and not just focused on what the AI will tell you. Take care, guys.